You notice it in small ways first, like a friend who replies more slowly, or a colleague who no longer volunteers their brilliance in every meeting, or the pause inside you that feels heavier than usual when the room grows loud. Something in you wonders if quiet is defeat, but another part, that older, steadier voice, whispers that quiet can be a different kind of arrival. The city keeps humming, feeds on friction, rewards performance, and yet there is a thinning at the edges where the air feels clearer, where people step sideways out of the current and no one announces they're leaving. You tell yourself it's a phase, then you watch the phase become a posture. The crowd still cheers, the calendar still fills, but the hunger that applause once fed no longer tastes like nourishment. You begin to realize that attention is a currency that spends you. The noise never meant to be cruel. It simply learned to multiply. Notifications nibble at attention, arguments masquerade as connection, and productivity sells you a script where your worth is measured by output, applause, and the speed you answer. You comply because that is what the room rewards. But late at night your breath is shallow, your jaw tight, and your mind chews the same unsatisfying sentences. What if the truth doesn't shout? What if it waits, patient as a shoreline, while you wear yourself out building sandcastles against its tide? The thought arrives softly and refuses to leave. You start noticing who seems unbothered by the storm, and you are startled by how restful conviction can look. Jung wrote about the self that lives beneath the persona, and you can feel that gap widen when you smile on cue and feel grief rise anyway. You become your own echo, efficient, agreeable, admired for endurance more than depth. There are days you speak flawlessly and say nothing real. There are days your laughter feels like a coat on the wrong body. You watch someone you respect refuse the argument the crowd begs them to join. They don't flinch, they don't posture, they let the wave pass. You feel both irritation and envy. Irritation because you were trained to chase the wave. Envy because their peace names your ache. The old pact starts to feel dishonest. What pact? That the loudest wins. That meaning equals reach. That intimacy is a public metric. It is hard to step away from a table that still offers crumbs of validation. It is harder to admit the crumbs keep you hungry. You keep asking how to be heard. You stop asking whether what you're saying belongs to you. The day you finally listen, the world does not collapse, it just sounds different. The pitch drops, the inner room appears. You realize how much of your life was spent rehearsing a version of yourself for an audience you could not see. Silence is not a shuttered door. It is a turned face. It looks toward something older than the feed, something your nervous system recognizes like water. When you walk without your mask for a block, you feel naked and enormous, as if a quiet wind is introducing you to your bones. There is fear here. Who will you be if no one is clapping? But fear is not a verdict. It is a threshold. On the other side, your attention lengthens. You can finally taste your food. You remember the names of constellations you learned as a child. You feel the tender humiliation of realizing how long you have been bargaining with yourself for permission to rest. People will call this withdrawal. Let them. You know it as oxygen. You are not abandoning the world. You are re-entering it through a smaller, honest door. You still love, work, and show up, but the speed changes. You do one thing at a time because your soul refuses to be sliced. You answer when you have something true to offer. You leave the argument that only wants your adrenaline. A friend says you seem distant. You hear the longing beneath their accusation and answer with presence instead of explanation. The conversation ends warmer than it began. This is how disappearance begins, not with a slammed door, but with a recalibration of allegiance. You trade the currency of approval for the slower wealth of alignment. You practice unspectacular rituals. Unhurried mornings, walking without headphones, naming the emotion before it becomes a decision. The gains are invisible from the street. Inside, the furniture of your mind rearranges. You sleep, you grieve, you stop editing your prayers. There is less to prove and more to become. One morning you realize the compulsion to broadcast has quieted. You share when sharing serves, not to escape the ache of being unseen. You do not seek exile, you seek proportion. The crowd is no longer an enemy, it is simply not your compass. And when you meet the ones who also stepped aside, there is a recognition beyond words, not superiority, not specialness, just a steadiness that does not need an audience to exist. You did not disappear. You return to the place where your voice can finally tell you the truth and be believed. You remained. When the world grows loud, your body keeps the score long before your mind admits anything is wrong. You wake already tilted, shoulders braced for headlines, a pulse that sprints without moving. Coffee helps you keep pace with a culture that confuses urgency with importance, but the interest rate on borrowed energy is steep. You notice how the room changes you. A bright office that feels like fluorescent weather, a dinner where jokes land like little competitions, a timeline that tastes metallic after 10 minutes. No one named the feeling for you when you were younger, but you can name it now: saturation. The senses shut down not because they are weak, but because they are wise. There is a limit beyond which kindness and clarity cannot breathe. You didn't plan to be sensitive. You learned how to carry conversations, absorb anxieties, and make heavy rooms lighter by offering your attention as a soft chair. People thanked you without realizing you paid the bill. Over time, it felt like depletion disguised as virtue. Jung would call this the cost of living too far from the center. When you orbit every urgency, you forget you have gravity of your own. The nervous system runs hot, then numb, then hopeless. That hopelessness is not a prophecy. It is a warning light saying, turn back toward the quiet where you remember your name. Consider the day you left your phone in another room for an hour and felt physically taller. Consider the afternoon you let a friend's crisis be theirs and noticed the world kept turning. Consider the evening you walked without sound, counted breaths to 4, and realized peace is not a miracle, it is maintenance. It is a reclamation. What you protect grows. What you flood drowns. You do not need harsher willpower, you need gentler conditions. Boundaries used to sound like meanness. A boundary is not a wall, it is a gate with a keeper who loves you. You decide what comes through your attention, because attention is not a flashlight. It is soil. If you plant outrage, you will harvest fatigue. If you plant presence, you will harvest discernment. You begin redirecting small streams first. No to the thread that only wants winners and losers. No to the meeting that has a committee for its feelings. No to the urgency that cannot name its purpose. The refusals feel awkward until they feel like relief. Relief arrives like weather you can breathe. Of course, someone will say you're overreacting, that you're dramatic, that this is just life. They don't mean harm, they mean habit. You spent years normalizing a speed your soul could not metabolize, and they grew dependent on your capacity to overfunction. Changing the dance steps makes everyone stumble. Let them stumble. You cannot protect everyone from the discomfort of your health. You can, however, model something cleaner, the rare calm of a person who knows where they end and others begin. Watch how this alters conversations. Watch how apologies appear where explanations used to multiply. Watch how the right people feel safer near you when you are not performing invincibility. There is a superstition that peace must be earned with pain. You were taught to white-knuckle through weekends, save rest for collapse, and treat tenderness like a prize for survivors. But rest is not a prize, it is a practice. Silence is not a luxury, it is a requirement for depth. The quiet does not ask you to do nothing, it asks you to do a few things fully. Eat and taste, work and stop, listen and answer, pray and wait. You are not a machine to be optimized. You are a living field that responds to weather. When you choose gentler weather, your intelligence returns. It returns. People imagine disappearance as a dramatic exit. For you, it looks like ordinary refinement. You turn off half the alerts you once thought were oxygen. You leave one group chat and find yourself with an evening that has edges again. You practice ending calls when you're tired, and the friend who values you adjusts. The one who only valued access does not. This is data, not tragedy. In the space that opens, your capacity grows from a puddle into a well. Presence returns with its original weight. You are no longer an open faucet pointed at everyone else's fire. You are a steady flame that warms without burning out. The world will remain loud. You are not responsible for turning it down. You are responsible for knowing your settings. This is not a smaller life. It is a truer one. When sensation stops screaming, you can hear the quiet truth that was waiting beneath overload. You were never meant to be everywhere. You were meant to be here, wholly, and from that wholeness to offer what only you can give. You learned the costume early. Agreeable, tireless, good at brightening rooms that did not notice the dimming of your own. The costume fit well enough that people mistook it for skin. Praise arrived like confetti. It fell quickly and made a mess. Inside, a quieter register kept asking whether admiration without intimacy could ever feel like home. You pushed that voice aside because you were busy being the kind of person who never makes other people uncomfortable. Comfort is a fine thing until it becomes a leash. Years pass. The leash starts to chafe. The mirror becomes too honest to avoid. And the face you practice for the world begins to look like a translation of someone you haven't met. Jung called the public mask the persona, a necessary bridge and a potential prison. You knew which stories got the careful nods, which jokes disarmed tension, which versions of doubt were still attractive. They simply rewarded a narrow slice of you so consistently that the rest learned to leave the room. There are conveniences to this arrangement: invitation, safety, the relief of predictability. There are costs you paid in private: the insomnia of unspoken grief, the boredom of listening to your mouth say what your bones don't believe, the vague nausea of being celebrated for a role you no longer respect. The breaking point is gentle. Not a crisis, a clarity. It arrives during an ordinary week, as many endings do. Perhaps it's the morning you answer a message with honesty instead of polish and feel your lungs return. Perhaps it's the evening you stop apologizing for leaving early and discover the door opens the same way. Perhaps it's the moment you choose a smaller table, pour a glass of water, and sit with the awkwardness that rises when you are not juggling everyone else's comfort. Nothing explodes. The world simply reveals its size. You notice how much of your life was spent rehearsing. You wonder what else could grow if you stopped auditioning. There is grief in authenticity, not because the truth is cruel, but because the costume once kept you warm. You miss the certainty of easy approval even as you stop craving it. Some friendships wobble when the old choreography ends, not out of judgment, out of fidelity to the person you are finally meeting. You tell the truth clumsily for a while. You go quiet to hear the difference between impulse and integrity. Standing there without the mask, you feel undressed and unarmored, but also strangely aligned, as if your spine just remembered its job. You begin to trust the weight of your own voice. The world will offer you new costumes: rebel, guru, saint. Decline them gently. Refusing the mask is not a brand, it is a return. You are not here to scandalize the crowd or impress the monastery. You are here to tell the truth with your life, and to allow that truth to change you. Sometimes the truth will make you smaller than you hoped and kinder than you imagined. Sometimes it will make you leave rooms you once dreamed of entering. You do not owe those rooms a goodbye tour. You owe yourself continuity. Show up in places where what is asked of you matches what you can give without pretending. The work will feel quieter, but it will last. It will last because you are no longer using your spirit as a marketing department. People who loved your mask will accuse your face of arrogance. Let them. Accusations teach you where permission once hid. You cannot build a life sturdy enough to withstand every misunderstanding. You can build one honest enough that misunderstanding does not govern. Integrity grows incrementally. The email you don't send, the second invitation you decline, the laugh you refuse when cruelty is fashionable. These are not grand gestures. They are bricks. Brick by brick, a home appears that can hold weather. The door of that home faces inward first. You cross the threshold and find yourself waiting at the table you left years ago. One night you tell the truth, and the friendship survives, altered and truer. Another night you tell the truth and the friendship ends, and your chest swells with both relief and grief. You let both be present. You wake without rehearsing. You become allergic to spaces where the price of belonging is self-betrayal. You start to believe that intimacy is not earned by consistency of performance, but granted by consistency of presence. The self you meet in quiet does not demand sainthood. This is less glamorous than a mask and infinitely more alive. The disappearance others notice is only the absence of your costume from their favorite stage. You did not vanish, you stopped auditioning. In the room that remains, you are finally available to the kind of work and love that do not require exile from yourself. Your face belongs to your face. Your name belongs to your mouth. The mirror softens. You walk into the day with less to manage and more to offer. The world is still loud. You move through it uncovered, not to be seen more, but to be split less. This is the ordinary courage that changes a life without asking permission. It holds. Silence does not flatter you at first. When the room finally empties and the screens stop asking for you, the leftovers of older stories rise like silt in a glass you just disturbed. You see the pattern you performed so well that even your pain became polite. You see the anger that never learned a safe doorway. You see the small, faithful child inside who believed love required erasing herself. Jung called this the shadow, not because it is evil, but because it is unlit. What you refuse to face chooses your life anyway. What you face loses its disguise. You cancel a dinner to sit on the floor and breathe. You take a notebook to a quiet corner of the park and write the sentence you most avoid, then answer it. You begin telling the truth to a trusted witness, therapist, friend, elder, someone who won't be impressed, won't be afraid, and won't let you become a story you already survived. It is the steady practice of refusing to abandon yourself. Mid-conversation, the old engine prefers noise. It interprets stillness as threat. You learn to sit anyway. You learn to give fear a chair without giving it the microphone. Memories return with inconvenient timing. A scent opens a hallway. A sentence from last year unlocks a door from 10 years ago. You begin to notice how often you reached for excellence, to hide from intimacy, or jokes to outrun grief, or certainty to avoid the humility of not knowing. You forgive yourself slowly, which is to say accurately. Forgiveness here is not a declaration, it is maintenance of attention. You watch the same thought arrive with new costumes and greet it by its real name. The thrill of self-accusation loses its shine. The romance of self-punishment loses its plot. Sorrow remains, but it matures. It stops being a storm and becomes weather you can work under. You thought healing meant answers. It offers questions that breed better questions. What am I protecting by staying busy? Which ache am I sentimental about because it keeps me familiar? What would change if I told the whole truth to someone and did not look away while they stayed? You do not receive a neater biography. You receive a sturdier relationship with reality. There is less magic than you hoped and more grace than you imagined. It shows up in ordinary places, in how you pause before explaining yourself, in how you say thank you without apology, in how you stop rehearsing conversations with people who are not in the room. The body participates. You shake after hard truths and realize trembling is not weakness but thaw. You learn that joy can coexist with brokenness without canceling it. You practice leaving the day behind at night. You practice beginning again in the morning without the violent pep talk. You stop borrowing tomorrow's courage for today's performance and discover you have enough for the step you are actually taking. You notice how often your urgency was a bid for control, and you trade control for contact. Contact with breath, with ground, with the presence that does not ask you to be impressive. Some will misread your quiet. They will call it avoidance, laziness, self-indulgence. You recognize their fear because you carried it too. When you are busy surviving, anyone who sits looks like a threat to the economy of striving. In this economy, growth is less like building a tower and more like tending a garden whose roots finally reached water. People cannot applaud what they cannot see, but they can feel it. Your presence begins to scatter fewer sparks and carry more heat. Your words become less frequent and more trustworthy. On paper, your life may look smaller for a while. Inside, the landscape expands. Where there used to be furniture stacked against the door, there is a cleared floor for dancing. Where there used to be a judge's bench, there is a long table. Old parts of you take seats and speak without being interrupted. The critic learns to ask questions instead of delivering sentences. The performer learns to rest without disappearing. The frightened child learns the door opens from the inside. You stop outsourcing your safety to whoever is loudest in the room. Sooner than you expect, you notice it takes less effort to be kind. You notice you can hold tension without rushing to fix or flee. Healing did not make you special, it made you honest. and honesty has a smell that draws the right people and sends the rest to other tables. This is not isolation, it is ecology. Your ecosystem grows cleaner. You do not need constant pruning because the soil is healthier. What does not belong withers without theatrics. What does belong remains, then multiplies. From the outside, it can look like you disappeared. From the inside, it feels like you finally showed up. The old noise is still out there. You do not hate it, you do not worship it. You simply stop confusing it with life. Silence is not empty any longer. It is furnished, warm, and capable of hosting weather. You keep the door open. You let the day come and go, and you stay. The return is never the parade you imagined as a child. It feels closer to dawn through a thin curtain, light arriving without discussion. You step back into ordinary rooms with a different weight in your feet, not heavier, but grounded, as if your souls now remember that floors were made to hold you. The people who knew you mainly by your usefulness are puzzled. The ones who knew you by your presence nod without language. Your calendar is less decorated and more alive. Some projects end because the story they served no longer fits. You begin to understand that most transformation is unremarkable from the outside and irreversible from the center. Jung said individuation is a return to what has always been trying to happen. You feel that sentence moving in your bones when you decline the invitation that would complicate your peace, when you accept the apology that does not arrive in perfect grammar, when you choose to love someone in ways that are useful to them rather than flattering to you. You're not trying to become impressive. Consistency here does not mean rigidity. It means fidelity to what you know in your quieter hours. The more you keep that faith, the less you need to prove anything. The proof becomes the texture of your days, how you listen, how you pause, how you stop. You do your work with attention and close it with a clean edge. You look for the smallest true thing in front of you and do it fully. You tell fewer stories about yourself and ask better questions about others. Your certainty loosens its jaw and allows curiosity to sit at the table. The circle you keep grows simpler and kinder. You learn that intimacy prefers rooms where no one is auditioning. Laughter returns without performance-enhancing cruelty. You no longer need to sparkle to be welcomed. You take your place without using shine as an apology. The old longing for a different world hasn't vanished. You plant small local proofs that a gentler pace is possible. Long walks after dinner, unambitious weekends, conversations that end when they are done rather than when the battery bleeds. You knock on your neighbor's door with soup because nourishment is a dialect older than taste. You give away credit. You stop tracking who owes who and count only what heals. It is citizenship in the world your soul remembers. The cage was never the sky. The cage was only what you learned to believe. People will ask for your method. You will tell them it is unmarketable. Attention, patience, and a refusal to be hasty in what deserves reverence. They may be disappointed. There is no shortcut here. Peace gains traction when you allow it to be ordinary. You will still wake some mornings convinced the old noise is the only weather. On those days, you do the small, faithful tasks. Wash a dish, speak one grateful sentence, stand under a tree until your breath remembers a wider rhythm. The work of return is the work of again. Your speech changes. You resist diagnosing strangers. You practice the unusual discipline of leaving rumors unfed. You apologize promptly without turning apology into theater. You praise in public, correct in private. and decline the bait of arguments that want your adrenaline more than your wisdom. Authority, the real kind, grows quiet. It arrives when your life and your language tell the same story. People trust that story even when they disagree with it. Trust is efficient. It spares everyone the tax of suspicion. Your days acquire a shape you can stand inside without pretending. You still belong to the world, just not to its panic. You still make plans, just not at war with your body. You still care, but you do not confuse control with care. Control says love is a leash. Care says love is a shelter. You build shelters. Time to listen without fixing. Meals that do not hurry the tongue, invitations that do not punish a no. You keep light on in a window for your own return when you drift. And when someone stumbles into that light, you welcome them with the kind of hospitality that does not erase difference or demand conversion. You offer your quiet as a place to rest, not a brand to admire. This is the part no one can measure, the private ease of being congruent. You can hear your inner voice without a court translator. You can say yes without a sales pitch to yourself. You can say no without a war. The mirror is not an enemy or a shrine, it is a tool. You use it to notice when you are carrying what isn't yours. You put it down. You walk lighter. Not because life got simpler, but because you did. And simplicity here is not smallness. It is a room with fewer chairs and truer guests. You take your seat, the day proceeds, the light keeps arriving.